Federalist 64, Part 2. I'm going to start with paragraph 5. Although the absolute necessity of system in the conduct of any business is universally known and acknowledged, yet the high importance of it in national affairs has not yet become sufficiently impressed on the public mind. They who wish to commit the power under consideration to a popular assembly composed of members constantly coming and going in quick successions seem not to recollect that such a body must necessarily be inadequate to the attainment of those great objects which require to be steadily contemplated in all their relations and circumstances, and which can only be approached and achieved by measures which not only talents but also exact information and often much time are necessary to concert and to execute. To concert means to gather, and also when he says popular assembly composed of members constantly coming and going, he's talking about the House of Representatives here, because they get elected, members get elected every 2 years, and it doesn't show constancy. Okay, I'll continue. It was wise, therefore, in the convention to provide not only that the power of making treaties should be committed to able and honest men, but also that they should continue in place a sufficient time to become perfectly acquainted with our national concerns and to form and introduce a system for the management of them. The duration prescribed is such as will give them an opportunity of greatly extending their political informations and of rendering their accumulating experience more and more beneficial to their country. Nor has the convention discovered less prudence in providing for the frequent elections of senators in such a way as to obviate the inconvenience of periodically transferring those great affairs entirely to new men, for by leaving a considerable residue of the old ones in place, uniformity and order, as well as a constant succession of official information will be preserved. He's talking about the modes of staggered elections of the Senate. In other words, only 1/3 of the senators go up for re-election every 2 years. So it says it gives constancy. You don't have the whole body of the Senate change. Not all of the senators go up for re-election. The next paragraph, there are few who will not admit that the affairs of trade and navigation should be regulated by a system cautiously formed and steadily pursued, and that both our treaties and our laws should correspond with and be made to promote it. It is of much consequence that this correspondence and conformity be carefully maintained, and they who assent to the truth of this position will see and confess that it is well provided for by making the concurrence of the Senate necessary both to treaties and to laws. It seldom happens in the negotiation of treaties of whatever nature, but that perfect secrecy and immediate dispatch are sometimes requisite. See, those are the two important words, secrecy and dispatch. There are cases where the most useful intelligence may be obtained if the persons possessing it can be relieved from apprehensions of discovery. Those apprehensions will operate on those persons whether they are actuated by mercenary or friendly motives, and there doubtless are many of both descriptions who would rely on the secrecy of the president but who would not confide in that of the Senate, and still less in that of a large popular assembly. The convention have done well, therefore, in so disposing of the power of making treaties, that although the president must, in forming them, act by the advice and consent of the Senate, yet he will be able to manage the business of intelligence in such a manner as prudence may suggest. They who have turned their attention to the affairs of men must have perceived that there are tides in them. Now this is the part where he quotes from the Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, and almost refers to the accidents that might happen to a ship, like running into a huge rock and sinking the ship, killing the people and the fortunes of everybody aboard, but also he's referring to the ship of state. So he says also, we who have given the responsibility to these people to run the ship of state should also be mindful of giving them the authority to do certain things that require secrecy and dispatch. Tides vary irregular in their duration, strength, and direction, and seldom found to run twice exactly in the same manner or measure. To discern and to profit by these tides in national affairs is the business of those who preside over them, and they who have had much experience on this head inform us that there frequently are occasions when days, nay, even when hours are precious. The loss of a battle, the death of a prince, the removal of a minister, or other circumstances intervening to change the present posture and an aspect of affairs may turn the most favorable tide into a course opposite to our wishes. As in the field, so in the cabinet, there are moments to be seized as they pass, and they who preside in either should be left in capacity to improve them. So often and so essentially have we heretofore suffered from the want of secrecy and dispatch, that the Constitution would have been inexcusably defective if no attention had been paid to those objects. Those matters which in negotiations usually require the most secrecy and the most dispatch are those preparatory and auxiliary measures which are no other ways important in a national view than as they tend to facilitate the attainment of the objects of the negotiation. For these the President will find no difficulty to provide, and should any circumstance occur which requires the advice and consent of the Senate, he may at any time convene them. Thus we see that the Constitution provides that our negotiations for treaties shall have every advantage which can be derived from talents, information, integrity, and deliberate investigations on the one hand, and from secrecy and dispatch on the other. I forgot to mention in part one that even though John Jay only wrote 5 of these Federalist Papers, and Federalist 64 was his last one, during the ratifying convention of New York's ratifying convention, he did write a pamphlet that was published in the newspapers. He did write actually a long essay that was published in the newspapers, and I forget the date of it. I've mentioned it in my the videos that I've translated the Federalist Papers to Farsi, but it was a very, very persuasive argument that he did, and it's actually one of his best works. It equals any one of his 5 papers that he contributed in the Federalist Papers.